Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Giants. I am John Schmeelk, and now we are joined by a man that needs no introduction to Giant fans, two-time Super Bowl champion as head coach of the Giants, the one and only Tom Coughlin. Coach, thanks so much for the time today. Appreciate you joining us.
Hi, John. Nice to see you.
All right, according to reports, Coach, you had a couple conversations with John Harbaugh as he decided whether or not he wanted to become head coach of the Giants. Wondering if you'd be willing to share any of what you shared with him in those conversations.
Well, number one, okay, John's a friend of mine, okay? And I text John when he was let go by the Baltimore Ravens to tell him, to congratulate him on his run, tremendous run with the Baltimore Ravens. And John came back to me, and at the bottom of his little paragraph, he said, and by the way, if you have a minute, I could use some advice. Okay, John. So I called him, and initially it was just, tertiary stuff. It was the New York Giant franchise, the Mara and the Tisch families, how they interacted in their ownership role of the New York Giants. And then it was, the chain of command in the building. How did the building work? Who's in the building? Who is the GM and so on and so forth. Some of the coaches that were still there, the front office people, and that type of thing. And then, just a little bit of conversation here and there about that. But basically what happened was, just as if any friend or anyone would call me and ask me about the New York Giants, that's where the conversations all began, okay? And then it involved further conversations. I mean, you mentioned two, there's more than two, but they were always of a nature of John, in his own way, trying to do his investigation, if you will, of the New York Giant franchise.
Well, Coach, you know how this building operates. You know more than anyone how the Mara and Tisch family operates. You know the type of person that John Harbaugh is and the type of coach that he is. Why do you think this is going to be a good match?
Well, John Harbaugh is a man of principle, okay? He grew up, his dad was a coach, so he's been in that particular environment all his life. He loves coaching. He loves working with people. He has an excellent personality. His whole theme is about everyone working together to be the very best that you can possibly be. And I think that's something to keep in mind about everyone in the building. All right. Everyone in the building performing at a championship level. And that's what John Harbaugh will be looking at as he investigates, the people, so on and so forth, those type of things. He has great respect for the game, great respect for the NFL. So it's going to be easy for you to understand that he's got a good personality, and as long as everyone is on the same page, John will be easy to engage with. However, you cross the line the other way, as in the players who want discipline, they want accountability. They've openly said that. They want to be held to a standard. And I think it starts right out with effort. I mean, that's what this thing would be all about. So that's why there isn't any question in my mind. The situation in New York with the Giants and John Harbaugh are coming together at the right time historically.
As someone that worked with the two families for as long as you did, why is that a good place for a coach to be and a good ownership group for a coach to work for? Now, John Harbaugh being with the Mara and Tisch families.
Well, because, for example, the Mara family goes back to the start of the National Football League. So historically, it's all there. It's all there about Mr. Mara. If you want to just do a little bit more reading and understand his incredible contribution to the game. It was, for me, it was Wellington Mara and Bob Tisch when I, was hired in 2004. Two great people, great human beings, very supportive, that type of thing. So with that, knowing what history is and knowing the way in which the Giants operate, John's quickly going to discover that uh, they're football people, okay? They're football people, and they're engaged. I mean, they have a lot of opinions. I mean, along with you've given me credit for John being there. Chris Mara did a great job, okay? Chris did a great job representing John and the Giants in laying the whole thing out and working with John throughout this whole process. And even in its darkest hour, I would say to John, please give great thought to how this can be put together so that this dream of yours and the Giants can come to fruition.
You coached against John Harbaugh teams. What are some of the telltale signs and the identity of a John Harbaugh team when you are preparing to go against them?
Tough, tough, physical, strong, aggressive, powerful defensive football, run the ball, and outstanding. Remember what John was now. John was a special teams coach who eventually became a secondary coach. And then right out of the blue is the guy that the Baltimore Ravens hired, okay, at the time that John was hired. But his teams play hard, they play physical, they get after it, they're nasty, that type of thing. It's the way the game was meant to be played.
This is a very kind of 20,000-foot question, Coach, and it's a very generic one, but I don't think I've ever asked it to you. A lot of people talk about, a creative offensive mind, creative defensive mind. But what, in your opinion, are the most important characteristics a good head coach has to have that's most important to building a good football team?
Expertise at his position, expertise in his role, but more than that, the power of team. If someone by reputation is an individual, a standoutish, pat me on the back kind of a guy, he's not going to work with John Harbaugh, okay? It's not going to work. But despite your ability, what have you, if you're willing to pay the price, if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to be a part of a team, if you're willing to understand, what this thing is all about. The game, John, today is so totally different from what I experienced. I might have had 12 coaches. Today, 24 and 25 guys in a room. How do you manage 24, 25 guys? Well, you'll see how John does it. And it will be those who are in. And if you're not, if you're one of those guys that hangs on the side, that's more interested in, look at me, or what's my next job going to be, that's not going to fly with John Harbaugh.
Well, Coach, you went there, so I guess I'll follow up there. The first big step has to be building a staff, right? So what are some of the important things as a head coach you're looking for in your coordinators and your assistants when you're trying to put a staff together?
Well, as I said, they have to be expert at what they do, but they all have to be willing to work as a team in the best interest of the New York Giants, okay? And as you say to anyone else, any young coach, I used to start out like this in my day, it started out, with no cell phones or anything. I didn't want to walk by an office, see a guy on the phone, all right? Because that gives me a bad idea about what you're trying to do. The thing that you do is you win under these circumstances, and there will be plenty of opportunities for you. You fail, there will be none. And that's just the way the game is. That's the way that it's always been from its very basics, and that's the way it remains today.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does. Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
Don't forget the Giants Huddle podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. You were a coach that did not call plays on either side of the ball when you were head coach of the Giants. You had multiple defensive coordinators, a couple of offensive coordinators. How specific were you when you talk to your coordinators about specifically the type of scheme that you wanted them to run? Was it more thematically, this is how I want to accomplish our goals? How much freedom did you give them, and how much input did you have in really building what the offenses and defenses were going to look like?
Well, when I first took over in Jacksonville, when I became the one person that put the whole thing together in Jacksonville, for the first couple of years with Kevin Gilbride, he was the play caller. Then I became the play caller. So I've done that from a head coaching role. Okay. But again, the head coach has an idea of what he wants his team to look like. And the coordinators have to share the vision of what the head coach wants. It's his offense, his defense, his special teams. And here's how I want this to be done. Like, for example, I'll sit here in this day and age, and what I'm watching in Seattle, for example, that's like the old Giant playbook. Great offense and defensive line play. All right, physical, dominating, run the ball, play action pass, great defense, great offense and defensive lines. Okay, that's right out of the script of the New York Giants. Okay, so whatever it is, and I'm telling you what I see with what John likes, because I've gone against it. That will be the nature, whether you're the play caller or not. They're all under your tutelage. And if I was never one to wait. If I didn't like something, boom, it was taken care of now, not later on where it could fester. All right. And that's the way it'll be with John. So you'll have, different personalities as offense, defense, special teams coordinators, but they will all be under the guise of the head coach, or it won't work.
I think culture is an overused word, Coach, but you talked about the importance of team and expressing that to the players. What are some of the first things you did when you came here in 2004 to make the players understand exactly what you wanted the team to feel like, that culture? And how did you try to get that point across and build that once you got the guys in the building in the springtime?
Well, one of the things that I know for John will be right away is communication. You must communicate to the franchise, to the players, to the people in the building, okay, what your expectations are as the head coach. What is it that you're looking for in terms of evaluating personnel, whether it's front office, whether it's, the dining room, it's whatever it is. What are the standards upon which you will work? And I can tell you right now, one of them will be great effort. It's going to be great effort. Does everyone in that building perform their duties as a championship level individual? Okay. Mediocrity is a disease and it has to go. Okay. So what John will start out doing is he's going to want to talk to all his players. He's going to want to talk to everybody in the building, and he will, because he's a good communicator. But that's kind of where it starts. And you always know you're working against the clock, because look at the calendar and know where you are and see how fast this offseason very soon will be underway. So all of these things have to be done yesterday.
Obviously, there's no more important player to a head coach than the quarterback. You had Mark Brunell in Jacksonville. You had Eli Manning here with the Giants. What does the head coach try to do to build that relationship with that franchise quarterback as almost his representative on the field with the team, and in some ways in the locker room as well?
That's a good question. I think the first thing, when I think about a young quarterback, okay, who you're trying to develop, you've got to have great teachers around him. But more than that, it has to be more than that. My education, I have a master's degree in social science education. You have more responsibility, okay, than just X's and O's, especially when you're talking about someone as valuable as your quarterback. What do you want that quarterback to be as he stands out in the community and is a reflection on the franchise. And so it goes much deeper than that. Okay. And, I've been blessed to be around some great human beings. You mentioned Eli, you mentioned Mark Brunell, but even some of the kids that came through as backups and performed in those roles were outstanding men. And I hope we help to develop that even further, as family men and great, Christian men or whatever. Okay. So you've got to surround that young quarterback with the kind of people that are going to teach him not only how to play the game and how you want to play the game, but how you want the franchise to be represented.
Now, part of this process is roster building. Obviously, John Harbaugh will work with general manager Joe Schoen and everyone else in the building in putting that roster together. How do you build a relationship with someone that maybe you hadn't worked with before, Coach, as you undertake this huge process together, which can be very challenging?
Well, I think the first thing you do, and you start right from scratch in terms of John will have an evaluation process, okay? He will have a way in which each player by position, what the most important values are. Where do you start at the top? What your quarterback, 1 through 10. What are they? He'll have an evaluation. Joe has an evaluation. The Giants have an evaluation. That has to come together in terms of when I talk to people who have a young person, a young man who's coming in to the personnel part of the business, okay? One of the very basics is you make sure that man understands what the evaluation process involves, okay? What are the step-by-steps so that you don't have people jumping right over the things that are important to you and then standing in a room pounding on the table about an individual that they have not evaluated according to the terms we're using. So you have to get together on the same page. How do you do that? Obviously, John and his coaches are going to sit with Joe and the personnel people and discuss exactly what it is the most important to the least important by position, to be there on the same page so that they can talk the same language when they talk about evaluating people.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
Obviously, he's going to have an opinion of all the players on the roster from watching all the tape and watching them played. But at the same time, how do you then meld that with then getting to know the player on a personal level when you get on the practice field with them, get in the locker room with them, and kind of putting those two together without necessarily allowing your preconceived notion of the player based on what you saw on tape maybe overwhelm what your eventual personal interaction with them when you're actually on the field with them at practice?
John, that was a long question. Okay?
Sorry.
But here's what it has to be. You're going to evaluate them on tape. You're going to have your notes about what you saw. You're going to bring each one of them in. You're going to sit across the table. You're going to have an honest, objective discussion about how that individual fits in to your program, what he needs to do to be a better player. What you see are the good and the bad, but the one thing that has to be an every time thing is the effort that goes into being the very best that player wants to be, or you as a coach want that player to be. That's where it all starts. There's no generalization about this. That's why time is such a factor. You have to make these appointments and you have to sit and talk to each one of these players so that they can hear what you see and what you want, and you can allow them to go ahead and have some feedback on the circumstance and the situation.
The final two questions, Coach. Anything unique that John Harbaugh is going to have to tackle being in New York versus Baltimore. I can't imagine that's the case given his level of success there. But you were in Jacksonville, then you came to New York. Is there going to be any bit of an adjustment for him?
I think one of the good things that John will have is he will, I think, develop a very good, as best as possible, relationship with the media. That's the one thing that always, you know, I mean, you can come from a franchise where when you have a press conference, there's 10 people in the room. When you come to a press conference in New York, there might be 75.
Right.
You know, that's a big difference. It really is. Everybody's got a question. You know what I mean? You can't answer them all, you know. But that is one thing that everyone who comes to work for the New York Giants has got to be very much, aware of, is that your relationship, be it objective, be it honest, be it straightforward, be it, recognizing, if you will, that everybody has a job to do, et cetera. That's usually what has to take place.
Anything unique, coach, to trying to do this, it being his second stop as a head coach, the same thing you did going from Jacksonville to the Giants?
You learn. You learn fast. You have, it's the same old deal. Everything you do in life is a process, and you're either learning every day or you're standing still and going backwards. So you do adjust, and you have to continue to adjust throughout your career because things change. Players change. The way they're coached changes. That whole type of thing. So that's the only thing that I would mention.
All right, and then I know this is very near and dear to your heart, so I wanted to give you a chance to talk about it, Coach. In 2012, John Harbaugh was awarded the Outstanding Civilian Award by General Odierno. I believe it was the same year you were, if I'm not mistaken, Coach. What does that say about him as a person?
Lynn Schwatzky received the award. At that time, she worked for Sesame Street. Now she works for the J Fund. I was humbled to be honored as well, and John was as well. And I think the theme there is that we all have tremendous respect and admiration for those who serve our country, those who are on the front lines, obviously giving their lives so that we might sleep under the blanket of freedom. And that's exactly what we did. In '09, John went with me, with Gruden and Cower and Fisher to Iraq because General Odierno, our good friend Ray Odierno, right there from Rockaway, New Jersey, commanding general of the unilateral forces in Iraq, our friend invited us, and we went, and it was an unbelievable experience, something you'll never forget, in going and visiting with our troops. And for me, the great thing was their morale. Oh my God, they were so excited. They were so proud to be there representing our country in war. And we were right there in Baghdad in one of the palaces is where we stayed. But John was a good friend of the general, as I was. And I know John had General O speak to his team when he was in Baltimore.
Coach, I know you have a J Fund event to get to. We really appreciate the time. If you want to tell the folks anything about the J Fund, things you're doing, way people can get involved, please, the floor is all yours. We know what a great cause it is and how near and dear to your heart that it is.
Well, the J Fund is, and I've been very, very fortunate for the way that the New York Giants have supported the J Fund. Our progress in New York could not be possible without the Mara and the Tisch family and all the great people working for the New York Giant organization. So we're humbled by that. Our work never ends, John, okay? We can't earn enough money or raise enough money to help all the people that we want to help. And as you know, our objective is to help families who have a child with cancer. And you've been there for Champions for Children. You've been there for our Sunday Blitz. You've been there for these things that we have always tried to accomplish right there, because it's so important for me, to keep Jay McGillis and what the things that he stood for and the quality of young man that he was, to have him represented in the J Fund and our work. And as I said, it never ends.
Coach, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it. Enjoy your event today. Always good to speak to you. Once a Giant, always a Giant, Tom Coughlin.
Thank you, John.
That's two-time Super Bowl champion and former head coach of the New York Football Giants, Tom Coughlin. We thank you for joining us on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. Coming to you from the Giants podcast studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. For Tom Coughlin, I am John Schmeelk. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. We will see you next time, everybody.